A Love Unveiled by Miles Calder. The spring of 1847 brought more than just blooming roses to Hampshire's countryside. For Miss Eleanor Blackwood, it brought an end to everything she had ever known. Standing in her father's study, her fingers traced the smooth edge of his mahogany desk as she read the letter for the third time, willing the words to change. "This cannot be," she whispered to the empty room, her other hand pressed against the tight stays of her corset, as if to hold herself together. The family solicitor's precise handwriting detailed their complete financial ruin with cruel efficiency. Her father's investments in the railway ventures had collapsed, leaving them with nothing but a mountain of debt and their rapidly diminishing good name. The sound of hoofbeats on the gravel drive pulled her attention to the window. Through the wavy glass, she watched as a striking figure on horseback approached Thornfield Hall. The rider sat tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders wrapped in a perfectly tailored dark blue coat. Even from this distance, there was no mistaking the commanding presence of Lord Alexander Huntington, the very man her father had been avoiding for weeks. Eleanor's heart quickened. Of all days for him to call, it had to be today, when their circumstances were laid bare and her father was away in London attempting to salvage what remained of their fortune. She smoothed her pale green muslin gown, thankful she had chosen one of her better day dresses this morning. The heavy brass knocker echoed through the house, and Eleanor heard Mrs. Phillips, their housekeeper, hurrying to answer it. She had mere moments to decide whether to receive him or claim to be indisposed. Pride won out over prudence. "My lord," she curtsied as he was shown into the morning room, noting how his dark hair curled slightly at his collar, still windswept from his ride. "Miss Blackwood." His voice was deep and cultured with the slightest hint of amusement. "I had hoped to find your father at home." "I regret he is in London on business, my lord." She gestured to a chair, maintaining the proper distance between them as she took her own seat. "Might I be of assistance?" Lord Huntington's gray eyes studied her with an intensity that made her pulse flutter. "Perhaps you can, Miss Blackwood. Your father has been rather elusive of late, particularly regarding certain business matters between our families." Eleanor's fingers twisted in her lap. Of course, the railway ventures. Lord Huntington had invested heavily on her father's recommendation. "I understand there have been some difficulties." "Difficulties?" His eyebrow arched. "Is that what we're calling the complete collapse of the Northern Line and the loss of thousands of pounds?" Heat crept up Eleanor's neck. "My lord, I assure you." "No need for assurances, Miss Blackwood. I'm well aware of the situation." He rose and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "Your father's debts to me are considerable. We will repay every penny," Eleanor said firmly, though she had no idea how. Lord Huntington turned, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "I have a proposition that might benefit us both." Eleanor stood, wariness creeping through her. "I'm not sure I understand." "It's quite simple, really." He moved closer, close enough that she could see into his eyes. "Marry me." The room seemed to tilt. "I beg your pardon?" "Marriage, Miss Blackwood. A union between our families would settle all debts and secure your future." His voice softened slightly. "You must be aware of your precarious situation." Anger flared in Eleanor's chest. "So you would purchase a bride with unpaid debts, my lord? How remarkably generous." "I would offer protection and stability to a woman who intrigues me greatly," he countered, taking another step forward. "I don't pretend our encounters at various social functions haven't left an impression on us both." Eleanor's cheeks burned at the memory of their waltz at Lady Ashworth's ball, the way his hand had pressed against her back, the heat in his eyes when he'd whispered in her ear, "That was before you came to collect your pound of flesh." "Eleanor." The use of her given name sent a shiver down her spine. "This is not about revenge or humiliation. I admire your spirit, your intelligence, your beauty. The financial arrangements are merely practical considerations." "Practical considerations that leave me little choice in the matter," she retorted, though her resolve was weakening under his intense gaze. "There is always a choice." He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "Though I hope you'll consider that this arrangement could lead to something far more meaningful than mere practicality." Eleanor withdrew her hand, needing distance to think clearly. "I cannot give you an answer now." "My father." "Your father will agree, as he has no other options." Lord Huntington's voice was gentle but firm. "But I'm not asking him, Eleanor. I'm asking you." She turned away, moving to the window where the spring gardens bloomed in riotous color. Everything she had ever dreamed of in a marriage, love, passion, mutual choice, seemed to be slipping away. Yet there was something in Lord Huntington's manner, in the way he looked at her, that suggested this might not be the cold business arrangement it appeared. "I require time to consider your offer," she said finally, turning back to face him. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You shall have it. 1 week, Miss Blackwood. I trust that will be sufficient?" She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Until then." He bowed and took his leave, the echo of his boots in the hallway matching the pounding of Eleanor's heart. The week that followed was both interminable and far too brief. Eleanor's father returned from London, ashen-faced and defeated, confirming what she already knew about their circumstances. When she told him of Lord Huntington's proposal, relief flooded his features. "My dear girl, you cannot refuse him," he said, patting her hand. "He is a good man, despite his current position as our creditor, and there are worse fates than being a countess." Indeed there were, Eleanor thought as she walked through the gardens each morning, trying to sort through her tumultuous feelings. Poverty and scandal loomed on one side, while a marriage of convenience, to a man who stirred something dangerous in her heart, waited on the other. Lord Huntington called again exactly 1 week later, looking even more handsome in a forest green coat that made his gray eyes appear almost silver. Eleanor received him in the garden, where the roses were beginning to bloom. "Have you reached a decision?" he asked without preamble, falling into step beside her on the gravel path. Eleanor stopped beside a blooming rosebush, its pink flowers nodding in the gentle breeze. "I have conditions." His eyebrows rose. "You are hardly in a position to negotiate, Miss Blackwood." Nevertheless, she lifted her chin. "If I am to be your wife, I will not be treated as a purchased commodity. I require your respect, your honesty, and your fidelity." "All things I would have offered freely," he said softly. "What else?" "My father will continue to live here at Thornfield Hall." "Agreed, though you will reside with me at Huntington Manor." Eleanor nodded, her throat tight. "And one final condition, my lord. If we are to marry, I want your word that you will at least try to make this a true marriage, not merely a business arrangement." Lord Huntington stepped closer, his expression intense. "On that point, Miss Blackwood, you need have no concerns." His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her lower lip. "I have wanted you since the moment I saw you put Lady Ashworth in her place at that horrible dinner party last season. Your wit, your fire, your compassion, they have haunted me. The financial situation merely provided an excuse to claim what I already desired." Eleanor's breath caught as he leaned closer, his lips barely a whisper from hers. "Is that sufficient assurance?" "Almost," she murmured, and closed the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, a mere brush of lips, but it kindled something warm and bright in Eleanor's chest. When they parted, she saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. "I believe," Lord Huntington said, his voice rough, "that we may have just negotiated the most favorable contract of my life." Eleanor laughed, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. "Does this mean I should start calling you Alexander?" "I insist upon it." He kissed her again, more thoroughly this time, until they were both breathless. "Though I believe husband will suit me even better." Their wedding took place 6 weeks later in the village church, with summer roses decorating every pew. Eleanor wore her mother's pearls and a new gown of ivory silk, and when Alexander lifted her veil to kiss her, she saw not her creditor or her salvation, but simply the man she had come to love. That evening, as they drove toward Huntington Manor, in their wedding carriage, Eleanor rested her head on her husband's shoulder. "Tell me truthfully," she said, "did you really propose just to secure your investment?" Alexander's laugh rumbled through his chest. "My dear wife, you are the only investment I've ever made that exceeded all expectations." He tilted her chin up to kiss her. "Though I must admit, your father's financial mismanagement was the most fortunate disaster of my life." Eleanor smiled against his lips. "I suppose I can forgive the railways after all." "I should hope so." His arms tightened around her. "They led me to you." The carriage continued on through the gathering dusk, carrying them toward their new life together. Eleanor thought of the girl she had been just months ago, standing in her father's study reading that devastating letter. She could never have imagined then that financial ruin would lead to her greatest happiness. As Alexander's lips found hers once more, Eleanor silently thanked every failed railway venture, every penny of debt, and every twist of fate that had brought them to this moment. Sometimes she realized the most precious things in life came disguised as disasters, and the greatest love stories began not with a dance or a glance across a crowded room, but with a business proposition and a brave heart willing to take a chance on something more. In the years that followed, whenever anyone asked how they met, Alexander would simply smile and say, "She was an investment that captured my heart." And Eleanor would laugh and add, "And he was a creditor who proved that some debts are worth more than gold." They had started as a business arrangement and grown into something far richer, a partnership of equals, a meeting of minds, and a love story that proved that sometimes the most unpromising beginnings could lead to the happiest of endings.